Okay, I think we'll get started. Thank you for joining us. This is a press conference from members of the National Coalition of Syrian Revolution and Opposition Forces, commonly referred to as the Syrian Coalition, or Syrian National Coalition, or Syrian Opposition Coalition. The guests today, Dr. Najib Radban, who is the Syrian Coalition Special Representative to the United States and the United Nations. That's Najib Ghadbian. Ms. Farah Atasi, who is a member of the Syrian Coalition, Farahatasi, and Khalid Saleh, who is the media director of the coalition based in the region but is here in Washington today, Khalid Saleh. I will ask them to speak, and then we'll take questions. Thank you.
Good morning. For the last 2.5 years, the Assad's regime use of excessive and indiscriminate force had resulted in the deaths of over 110,000 civilians in Syria. This extreme use of force also resulted in over 6 million Syrians being displaced since the start of the revolution. There are about 2 million Syrians who are living or seeking refuge in neighboring countries at this point. UN estimates talk about 1 in 3 Syrians in dire need of assistance. The Syrian Coalition at this point estimates that the needs for Syrians is estimated at $750 million for humanitarian relief per month. It's important to remember that the Assad regime is not fighting this battle by itself. He is being assisted by Hezbollah militias. He is being assisted by Iranian forces. He is also being assisted by the blind support that he receives from Russia. On August 21st, the Assad regime used chemical weapons against innocent civilians in the countryside of Damascus, resulting in the death of 1,466 civilians. Over 400 of these were children. The Syrian coalition at this point can confirm that we have confirmed the identities of 1,288 of these victims. We have basically their pictures, their first name, last name, all documented. We still have quite a few who were buried without taking their identities, so we're still working through the final confirmation. The Syrian coalition believes that a strategic and decisive U.S. action is needed, first to hold the Assad regime responsible for the use of chemical weapons against innocent civilians, as well as to stop the Assad forces from using chemical weapons in the future against Syrians. And until now, there hasn't been a clear signal sent to the Assad regime that the indiscriminate use of force against innocent civilians will go unpunished. And let me be clear about this. The Syrian coalition is not asking for an open-ended intervention in Syria. We are not asking for boots on the ground. Instead, we are encouraging limited and focused use of force in Syria to be able to stop Assad from using chemical weapons against Syrians in the future. U.S. inaction is not an option. We believe not only that the Assad regime is watching very carefully, but North Korea is watching, Iran is watching, Hezbollah militias are all watching. We are asking the U.S. Congress to authorize President Obama's decision to take actions against the Assad regime. In parallel with any future military action in Syria, the U.S. and the international community must also increase pressure and intensify their pressure on the Assad regime and its allies to come to the negotiating table. The Syrian coalition remains committed to a political solution. This is something that we've shown in both words and in actions. You can compare that to what Bashar al-Assad said in his last interviews, where he said that the only way to deal with the opposition is by destroying them. This is a vast contrast from the position that the Syrian coalition takes. Finally, since the establishment of the Syrian coalition, one of the main initiatives that the Syrian coalition worked on is the establishment of the Supreme Military Council, the SMC, which was established about a week after the establishment of the Syrian coalition. The SMC controls over 100,000 fighting soldiers on the ground. It is under the leadership of General Salim Idris. We have made it clear that a U.S. action in Syria, as well as increased support to the SMC, will strengthen our ability to repel the Assad regime from using chemical weapons in the future. With that, I'm going to open it to Q&A. I'll be taking the questions, Dr. Najib, Ms. Atassi as well. Basil, you want to run the Q&A?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Susan Cornwell with Reuters. I was wondering if any U.S. provided arms had yet arrived with the rebels, and why do you think there's been a delay in this process? And do you hope that because of what's going on now, that somehow this will be stepped up, that is the provision of arms? Do you have any signs from the administration that would happen?
Dr. Najib?
Yes, we can confirm, in fact, that the U.S. administration has increased its support of the opposition and of the SMC. And if you listen to the administration's statements, I think they're focusing on two tracks. One is dealing with the chemical weapon side, and they're trying to make this related to the latest use of chemical weapons and punish those who carried out those and establish deterrence for future use. The other one, which in fact many of them have announced that they will continue to support the opposition, the SMC, in order to achieve the larger objective, which is political settlement and democratic transition in Syria. So I think we should expect more support on that front as well.
Other questions? Yes.
Thank you. I'm Indira Lakshman from Bloomberg News. I wanted to ask whether the opposition feels abandoned by the Obama administration in that the public statements made by President Obama have been only with reference to chemical weapons. He's explicitly said he doesn't want to shift the balance in favor of the opposition or, do anything that would oust Assad. So particularly now with this Russian proposal on the table, do you feel that the administration is leaving you guys hanging and not supporting you?
No, we don't feel the administration has abandoned us. I believe that we do understand that the administration has to convince a very skeptical public about supporting taking military action. And so that's why they're trying to, focus on the chemical weapons question. I do agree that we haven't seen much debate about the opposition, much debate about Syrians, much debate about the larger, in fact, context. And that's, I think, is a weakness of the whole discourse, in fact, about Syria. Up to the use of chemical weapons, we haven't seen much coverage. Many of you guys were not even reporting Syria, even though there were 100, 200 people killed on a daily basis. And all of a sudden now, everybody's interested in Syria, but definitely much of the focus is on the chemical weapons. But from our point of view, and this is why we have this press conference, we want to bring the larger context. We want to bring and pinpoint to the source of all of these tragedies, and that is this regime has been engaged in systematic killing of Syrians from day one of this revolution in March 2011. So again, while we understand the administration's kind of point of view, we are in touch with the administration. They are, in fact, in daily touch with us. Secretary Kerry is talking to the president of the coalition almost, I would say, on a daily basis to coordinate efforts. So in that sense, I mean, this is why we, the Syrians, want to talk about Syria. That's the purpose of this press conference. And bring to your attention the fact that it's not about chemical weapons. Chemical weapons is a small thing, small component of this. The larger context is Syrians deserve to be protected by the international community, and the international community has failed to carry out this responsibility. In fact, Syria had been an ideal case for R2P under the UN 2005, of course the UN has been paralyzed by Russia's obstructionist behavior at the Security Council. That's why I think the US, the Obama administration, finally taking leadership. I would just mention that when Obama decided to put the credible threat of the use of force, we see now responses, not only from the Syrian regime, but from Russia and Iran, and they are willing to talk about other issues. That's why we support the administration's effort, again, to carry out decisive and strategic action.
Other questions? Yes, in the back.
Brian Wheeler with Al Jazeera English. I was just wondering if you could perhaps be more specific on what kind of support you've received from the Americans, specifically in regard to military hardware. There's been a lot of talk over time about whether arms are in fact getting to the SMC, so I'm wondering if you might be able to be specific about that. And also, do you take a specific point of view as regards the new Russian proposal, even though it's in its infancy, as the international custody of the chemical weapons?
On the first part, we don't want to discuss the details of that. In fact, we're not going to comment on what kind of support they're providing to the SMC. On the second part of the question, the president stated that he sees a positive potential in the Russian proposal. From our point of view, we do want that these chemical weapons be secured, preferably under international some kind of control, but within the larger context of the following. This is not only, again, about securing the stockpiles of chemical weapons, but we want to make sure that those who carried out these attacks be held accountable. I think any solution for that would not take into account this point, would be incomplete. The third element, of course, and that is the element of a political solution. That's, in fact, again, we want to bring into the attention that 110,000 Syrians were killed before the latest use of chemical weapons. And I think that's too. Accountability has to be included in any political solution. That's why when Geneva was brought into the table, our position was Assad should not be, in fact, be included because of the accountability factor. Because we accept the Human Rights Council, international human rights organizations, designation that those who committed crimes against humanity, against Syrian people, should not be part of the transition, should not be part of the future of Syria. So I think if we take those elements and, again, other conditions, then we think we could discuss that proposal. Final point, we don't trust the Syrian regime. We don't trust the Russians.
And so you don't trust the proposal that's been just made? You don't trust the Russian proposal?
Actually, I just would like to make some clarification about the Supreme Military Council headed by General Salim Idris, because there have been a lot of misinformation recently at the media about the Free Syrian Army, and there are certain accusations and claims that they are violating certain Geneva Accords. I would like just to stress the idea why we are here. We are here today to introduce to you who is the Syrian opposition forces, the political one and the military one. The political one, as you see, the Syrian National Coalition is a group of different Syrian forces united together behind one goal: end of dictatorship and end of tyranny. We want freedom, we want justice. The Syrian people are not whatsoever fighting for revenge, they are fighting for justice. This group consists of different opposition forces inside and outside Syria. And we are here to represent them. We are here to answer any questions you may have about these political leaders that they are fighting Assad regime. As far as the Supreme Military Council, we all know that the Free Syrian Army are Syrian defected officers. They are Syrian soldiers who defected from the Syrian regime and refused to point their weapons against their own people. And they decided to join the Syrian forces against Bashar al-Assad. So some of them are civilians, some of them are military leaders, like, for instance, General Salim Idris, he holds PhD in engineering. He's an educated person, highly refined person. All the Free Syrian Army was formed in December of 2012. They did not violate any Geneva norms or accords, the Geneva Convention accords. But what I would like to stress here regarding the help, I think the United States really did not give the full support for the Free Syrian Army and for General Salim Idris, and mainly the focus was on humanitarian and medical relief. They did not help with the intelligence support, they did not help with the logistics support, and of course they did not help of aiding the Free Syrian Army with the sophisticated weapon, at least to protect the liberated area, whereas we have the Iranian and the militia of Hezbollah and the Russian aiding the regime with $500 million a month to help the Syrian regime fight our own people. So we stress the importance of the US administration actually not only to hold the regime accountable for the crimes that he committed in September, but also to help. It's an opportunity right now to support the Free Syrian Army and to support the Syrian national coalition in their cause. We started this revolution and we can end this revolution, but of course we need the help from the US administration. And just really quickly about the Russian proposal, definitely we don't trust the Russians. After 2.5 years of manipulating the Syrian revolution, of manipulating the situation on the ground, of aiding the regime with military weapons, with scards, with money, with intelligence, with all the support, how we can trust them? They become part of the problem. They're not part of the solution. So we will weigh what this initiative is all about, and we will work according to the Syrian revolution interest. That will be our answer to this initiative. Thank you.
So one of the concerns of the international community is ensuring that the weapons, lethal or non-lethal aid, does not fall into the wrong hands. And this is also a concern that is shared by the Syrian coalition. After the establishment of the SMC, the Supreme Military Council, there were specific bylaws that talk about even the future shape of Syria. We're talking about democratic, pluralistic society in Syria. Every FSA brigade that joins the SMC must meet certain conditions. When the SMC was first started, there was 564 brigades that actually joined. Since then, there are more brigades that are joining. One of the things that these brigades must sign on, first, they must agree and abide by the bylaws and the constitution of the SMC. Some of the other things, they must agree for regular monitoring and audits that are conducted by the SMC, and some of the partner countries as well, to ensure how the aid, whether lethal or non-lethal, is used. Some of the kind of finer points that the SMC looks after, and you want to kind of keep those in mind. If any of the brigades is found that they have used a minor, anybody younger than 18, to fight, to conduct any kind of operation, they will be cut off completely from supplies from the SMC. If any of the brigades has any foreign fighter amongst its ranks, they will be cut off from supplies received from the SMC. Now, we've established those rules back in November of 2012, and as you can imagine, we continue to refine them. This is something that we're working on very closely. However, the international community that also looks carefully at the auditing mechanisms that we have is trusting the SMC further. The US is distributing non-lethal aid, and as we confirmed, some lethal assistance as well to the SMC, because they are sure that the mechanisms that the SMC have established are well tested, and they will ensure that weapons are not falling into the wrong hands.
Is the United States performing audits in the country?
I cannot comment about which countries are performing. I can say some of our partner countries who share the same goal as us are doing some of these audits.
Robert Worth from the New York Times. Has there been much internal dialogue and discussion about the possibility of an American airstrike? My understanding is that some people in the coalition or some of its partners may feel that, especially if it's a very limited airstrike, it might do more harm than good.
I'll let Dr. Najib take that.
We definitely want this strike. We're using the words decisive and strategic to achieve military objectives, that is, degrade the ability of the Syrian regime to carry out further attacks, whether chemical or otherwise. But we definitely wanted to lead to a political solution. Again, we believe this conflict must end with democratic transition. The Syrian people have sacrificed more than 100,000 people in order to achieve their objectives of transferring this country from one-party rule into multi-party state, from the mafia type of rule of the Assad into state ruled by rule of law, and into a democratic, inclusive Syria. So we believe this is the opportunity. I think the weakness of all of the previous political initiatives, some of which were presented by the coalition, by Syrian groups, by the Arab League, and by the way, the Russian vetoed 2 resolutions which called for political solution along the line of the Arab League, which called for Assad maybe to delegate his power to his vice president and then open the chance for a political solution. Now we believe, with the US taking up leadership, which was lacking, you heard my colleague, Ms. Farah, talking about how, in fact, we were complaining about the lack of leadership of the Obama administration. Now, this has been, in fact, introduced to the whole discussion. We believe there is an opportunity, not only to address this specific, again, of the use of chemical weapons, which is important, but to go and, in fact, deal with the larger context, larger conflict, and that is the Assad, again, continues and will continue to use force against Syrian people unless, again, really, checked by the international community. So from our point of view, no, we're not just, focusing on that. In fact, all of the efforts of the coalition, of the SMC, is for the hours after the attack. How are we going to try to present order, law and order to these areas, protect, maybe civilians, and fill the vacuum that might be created. We see this as an opportunity, again, to end this conflict and to move into democratic transition.
Sorry, I was curious. Did you conduct internal deliberations? Were there any differences of opinion inside the coalition about whether it's a good idea for the U.S. to conduct a limited strike?
No, on this issue, I think there is consensus that we need this. This is, in fact, a necessary step in order to bring that kind of political solution.
May I just add that the Syrian coalition is the voice of the Syrian revolution, and this is what the Syrian people wants. We're not saying what we want as political leaders. We are here to convey the voice of the Syrian people inside Syria, who's been under this genocide and war that the Assad regime is waging on them. So we're not in a position here to say what we think as Syrian or as Syrian Americans. We are here to convey what the Syrian people inside Syria, who's been suffering, who's been misplaced, who's been kidnapped, women being raped. We are here to convey their message to the United States. And also I have some message to the anti-war. This is not a war. This is not Iraqi war. This is not another Libyan war. We've been in a popular uprising for the past 2.5 years. The Syrian people are fighting alone in this battle. And we never asked for a US direct military intervention. And again, as my colleague said, we never asked for boots on the ground. We've been fighting this alone with a very limited tool, with a very limited help. We're not fighting Assad regime, as we said. We're fighting on so many fronts. So that's why we are here to say the Syrian people are not advocating for war. Syrian people advocate for peace, and the Syrian people want the peace and want end of this conflict. However, there is a war inside Syria. It's a regime war that he's waging against his own people. Where is the anti-war movement when Syrian people been slaughtered and killed and got all the humiliation? Where was the anti-war voices around at that time when the Syrian people cried for help? Yes, we want to end the war once for all. We want to end the war and the genocide that the Assad regime is conducting in Syria, and that's our message to the U.S. public.
More questions?
Sarah Lee with Conservative Intelligence Briefing. There have been some reports that the SMC is fracturing and there's some leadership contentiousness. Can you respond to that?
Okay. So like I mentioned, when the SMC was established, it had 564 brigades amongst its ranks. Since then, more brigades have joined the SMC. It's actually had grown in numbers. When the SMC was first started, we were talking about 65 to 70,000 opposition soldiers. Now we're close to 100,000 opposition soldiers. What I see actually on the ground, especially given the last attack by Assad using chemical weapons against innocent civilians, that actually helped solidify the leadership of the SMC. More brigades are finding the need to coordinate very closely with the SMC and join the ranks of the SMC. This also points to a very important step. Well, we've been asking the international community, any countries that want to support the revolutionary forces on the ground, they must use the SMC as the credible channel, a channel that the Syrian coalition stands behind. I think this is something that we are seeing in the last few months.
So basically, by asking people to use that official channel, you're hoping that will solidify some of the fracture?
Like I said, anyways, people are coming together. They're finding that the SMC has professional military leadership. They're able to do much better military planning than each of the brigades fighting on its own, trying to do the planning. Now you have coordinated operations running in different provinces. This is something that we did not have previously. Although Assad used chemical weapons on the 21st of August, if you look at the previous 30 days to his use of chemical weapons, the SMC and the FSA fighting brigades on the ground were able to achieve 63 strategic victories all across Syria. They were able to push Assad forces in Aleppo, in Idlib, in Deir ez-Zor. They were able to push him also in Daraa. So the SMC has proven as a credible, legitimate authority over the Free Syrian Army brigades.
I was just wondering, this is not related, but could you confirm whether or not SMC has received lethal aid from Qatar and Saudi Arabia?
I cannot comment on the specific countries. I can say that some of the supporting countries are providing lethal assistance to the SMC.
Yes, question on the side.
Yes, sir.
Sam Hussein from PA Media. I want to clarify something.
Dr. Najib.
Najib.
Said earlier that you didn't want to negotiate with the current regime, with Bashar al-Assad. Can you what have been the modalities for those coming to this late? You folks have been refusing to negotiate up until this point. Is that accurate?
No, that's not accurate.
That seems to be what you were saying.
No, let me be very specific. We supported every political initiative to end this conflict. We supported the Arab League initiative, which begins with Assad delegating his powers to his vice president. We thought that was a good idea. We supported the elements of Geneva I, and we were willing, in fact, we were working to go to Geneva II. But our understanding of Geneva I is the following. There will be a transitional government with full executive authorities, including the security and military areas, which means Assad has no role in these areas. That's our understanding of Geneva I. So we were going to Geneva II with this understanding. We wanted to include an element of accountability in the negotiations, in the political process. And that's why we believe that Bashar al-Assad has committed crimes against humanity, and he's not acceptable as a person. We believe his departure from the scene is a positive step for any political solution, by any means, and definitely after the use of chemical weapons, he's absolutely not acceptable. He, his brother, and those who are implicated in the use of chemical weapons. Now, there are a lot of people who support Bashar al-Assad. They are Syrians. Some of them are forced to do so. Some of them, in fact, are under the propaganda of the regime. Some of them defending their privileges. It's those elements, in fact, we want to talk to. Those are Syrians. I mean, and that's what we want to talk about. So again, we want a political solution that, again, would include some elements of accountability. And again, we believe Bashar al-Assad is a basically destructive element in any negotiation. So that's the way we understand Geneva I and any political solution. After the use of chemical weapons, he should be, in fact, brought to justice, preferably very soon. And any international, maybe, effort by our friends at the UN should include that. Otherwise, we will not support it.
So just to clarify, so it's not a new position. It's been your consistent position over time that you will
Right.
But you, well prior to this, over the last 2.5 years, you will not take that.
Well, let me be, I mean, that position evolved. Early on, before the regime committed atrocities of, the mass scale, I mean, early on, we appealed to Bashar al-Assad before the revolution, in the first few weeks of the revolution, to take serious reformist step to bring Syria into a democratic kind of conclusion. But, the regime was using lethal weapons, using live ammunition from day one in Daraa, remember? And so immediately, I mean, as the regime continued, and it was obvious that they did not believe in a political solution, Bashar al-Assad, up to the use of chemical weapons, he communicated to us, I mean, directly, indirectly, that he can achieve a military victory, and he's working toward that end. He's talking Geneva, but he's not going to go to Geneva. Why should he talk about his departure? Why should he talk about his stepping down? I mean, it doesn't make sense. But I think for us, again, since the Arab League initiative, we took that position that if he, in fact, were to delegate his powers, at that point, delegating powers, maybe he could stay for a while. But as he continues to commit atrocities, crimes against humanity, against Syrian people, we were clear we will not negotiate with individuals who committed crimes against humanity, against the Syrian people. Again, that's a principled position. We continue to stick by that position.
May I add just the question today, actually, especially after the Russian initiative, is Bashar al-Assad ready to give up his chemical weapon arsenal, and he's not ready to give up his power? Is that the right message the Syrian people really getting? That he's ready to give the whole CW arsenals, and he's not ready to give up his seat just to save Syria and stop this ongoing cycle of killing. I think if the United States managed to work with the Russian on pressuring Assad regime to give up his arsenal, chemical weapon arsenal, they can work with them to pressure him to give up his seat after 2.5 years of continuous bloodshed and killing.
There's a question up here. Okay, any other questions?
Go ahead, Jay.
I wanted to ask about the different factions. For example, the Kurds. How are you working with them? And also, how do you, in a post-Assad plan, how do you intend to fold in the Alawites without any kind of retribution?
Syria is a diverse country, has several ethnic and religious groups, and I think there is a majority of Syrians from all backgrounds that won't change in Syria. The Kurdish movement has been, in fact, affiliated and supported the opposition. They've been in the opposition for a long time. They do share the objectives of the Syrian coalition, and before that, the Syrian National Council, of finding a solution for the Kurdish problem within a unified Syria. That is, they get all the rights they were in fact deprived of under the Assad regime. And so that's the majority position among the Kurds. I think we have an issue. The Kurds have been represented in the SNC and now in the Syrian coalition, and they were founding members of the Syrian coalition. There have been some issues among the Kurdish parties, and there are many of them, over the percentage of representation, and there's ongoing discussions between the Kurdish National Council and the Syrian National Council to address that question. But I think we all agree on the overall objectives. Let me say that there is some element within the Kurdish movement that's still affiliated with the regime. Those are the Syrian PKK side, and they clash, in fact, with the Free Syrian Army in some areas. But we believe that the Kurdish question can be solved again within Syria. As far as the Alawite, they are definitely Syrians. They have all the rights of Syrians. I think, as I said, some of them are, in fact, part of the other side. The way we believe in this, any political solution for Syria must include a transitional justice element, in which, again, nobody will be held accountable because of their affiliation, because of who they are. Only those who committed crimes against Syrian people, I think, should be held accountable, whether they are Sunnis, Christian, Alawite, whatever background they have. We are trying to create a Syria that's based on equal citizenship, respect all of its citizens, and in fact celebrate the diversity that exists in Syria. So I don't think that we have a problem. In fact, we have concern that there might be some prospect of retaliation against some communities, and within the coalition and the SMC, we are pursuing plans to protect Syrian civilians of all backgrounds, especially those who might in fact be targeted. This is the difference between our position and the other side. Bashar al-Assad does not see in those who oppose him humans. If you listen to his interview last night, they're all extremists. Charlie Rose, pressed him. Do you think they're all extremists? They're all terrorists? He said, yes, they're all. No, we don't see it that way. We feel so sorry when a Syrian is killed, whether from the other side or from our side. I think that kind of high moral ground is what distinguishes us from the other side. So we want to create, again, a state that's, in fact, for all of its citizens.
Christina Wilkie with the Huffington Post. In the past half hour, the U.S. has said that it's prepared to move forward with a UN framework for Assad's chemical weapons. I mean, are you suggesting that you would sit out of any kind of a broad multinational talks on chemical weapons in Syria? Would you actively oppose international efforts to secure them? As long as the Assad regime is in place, are you going to take a position opposing efforts to rid Syria of chemical weapons?
Quick answer, no, we will not. We will work with the international community. Remember that we worked with the UN on so many issues related to Syria. We trust, for instance, our allies and friends, the French, the British, the US, in fact, will want to include an element of accountability for the latest use of chemical weapons. So we will make sure that in fact should be included in any international efforts. As I said, I think the problem with the international efforts, especially at the level of the Security Council, was Russia. And to some extent China supporting Russia's position. The 3 resolutions that Russia vetoed, one is condemning the use of violence, which was much small scale than what we've seen since then. The other 2 related to presenting political solution along the line of the Arab League. And that same solution received 137 votes in the General Assembly. So we believe that the international community, most countries of the world, are in fact taking the right side of this conflict. And we believe we can work with them. But I think what was lacking in this effort, and that's come back to why we're here, is the fact that there was a lack of credible threat of use of force to, in fact, bring some accountability, to bring some element of consequences. I mean, the third, actually, specifically resolution that Russia vetoed was a UK resolution when the international observers were still in Syria to introduce consequences. If the regime does not abide by that, there should be consequences, and they vetoed that. So I think our problem with the international effort was either it's been obstructed by Russia, or there was really lack of credible threat of the use of force, which when we see the president finally introduced, you started to see progress. That's why we believe this should go on to the very end. We urge members of the House to support the president in this effort. We urge the US public to support the president. And I think the more this country is shown as united in this effort, the more likely we will get to a political solution that fulfills the aspiration of the Syrian people.
Professor, our delegation, they say they're being bombarded with people overwhelmingly calling, emailing, texting, whatever, saying they oppose U.S. intervention. A lot of them just seem war-weary at this point. Why do you think there's so much public opposition or hesitance, and what would you say to them?
I totally understand that perspective. Again, the background to that is the Iraq war, before is Afghanistan. This country has been, in fact, involved in 2 wars for so long. This country has offered so many sacrifices in terms of human sacrifices and in terms of, material sacrifices. So I do understand that fatigue that we all, in fact, are witnessing now. But I think there are a couple of points I would mention. Number one, the more you know about Syria, the more you learn about it, you understand the context, the history, the evolution of this conflict, you would support the effort of the president. Second, this is a president that is very reluctant to take the country into a war. He was elected, we all understand, on a platform to end wars. And I think we should trust that he's not someone who's just going to jump at any opportunity to involve this country into, again, another war. So I think he took his time. In fact, for many of us, we were critical of his lack of leadership politically and sometimes on the question of Syria. A third factor I think I see, and that is, all of a sudden, again, you see the internal politics coming into play. You see it in the House. There are so many people who are opposed to the president for specific reasons, on the Democratic side and on the Republican side. And our message, again, to members of the House is that this is not a domestic issue. I think this is a serious issue that does affect the national security, the national interests of this country. I think Congress, it's in the best interest of Congress to show unity and stand behind the president on this issue. Believe me, the Obama administration is not a warmonger administration. The president himself is painfully making the case to the American public because he sees there's no other way. And again, I think what happened over the last 24 hours should be a last point to the US public, that when the US administration showed seriousness, willingness to take, basically a decision, you see progress. So what I would say to most Americans, do support your president, urge your members of Congress to vote for this, in fact, legislation, and in fact, we may not need to even use military force. But my last point again, please go read about this. I mean, I see a lack of knowledge, a lot of, a lack of context in the discussions about this issue. So this is the right, I think, course of action for the U.S. public.
Question, but then I'll note that they will be available if you want to come and speak to them. And also, the information in the folders is attributable as a written statement from the coalition.
We also need
Sorry.
We'll want to drop their business cards off.
We can also collect, business cards. The woman on the end over there can collect them for follow-up interviews.
Hi, Paul Schenken with U.S. News and World Report. You talked about how you would be able to maintain stability in the case of a U.S. missile strike on Syria. Have you been coordinating with the U.S. or had you asked to on what the extent of that strike would be and where it would strike to ensure you'd be able to do that?
Let me first start by saying we know that the Assad regime does not have the intelligence or military capability to respond to any action by the international community. What worries, since we're talking about limited strikes that might go as you read in the different news outlets, we're talking about strikes that will be from 2 to 3 days. What worries Assad the most is the movement by the SMC, the Supreme Military Council, by the Free Syrian Army on the ground during the strike and afterwards, the aftermath of those strikes. What I can say is that the SMC leadership is coordinating with different countries from the Core 11, those countries who might be participating in carrying out those strikes. The SMC has very well established plans to benefit from the strikes if they do take place, as well as the SMC has very detailed plans to secure specific area, protect specific neighborhoods that might have some minorities living in them, secure some different parts such as public services, if the regime is impacted and is not able to keep security in Syria.
So do you know now where these strikes will take place?
I cannot comment about that. As you can see, the discussion is still going on. We don't know if these strikes are going to take place or not. With that, we thank you guys for coming. We are going to be available for the next 10-15 minutes over here to answer any other questions you might have. Thank you.